Okay, so we have come to the Holocaust portion of our conversation about World War II. This is going to be the most difficult of images, obviously, to look at and content to sift through. I know that you guys have learned about the Holocaust for a long time now in your educational process, and so hopefully you learn something new. And it's just always a good reminder to refresh our historical understanding of the events of the Holocaust. So it says, from the time he came to power, Adolf Hitler had targeted Jews for persecution. By the end of the war, Nazis had murdered 6 million Jews and 5 million other people they considered inferior. By 1945, and it's actually closer to 7 million Jews, it's somewhere between 6 and 7 million Jews. In 1945, there was no word from Hitler's murderous plan of extermination. Today, it is called the Holocaust. We continue to remember this tragedy and seek ways to prevent anything like it from ever happening again. And if you're interested in this topic, and take Facing History. Right? The propaganda poster from 1935 glorifies the image of what the Nazis saw from the ideal Aryan youth. At this time, posters and comic books viciously caricatured people the Nazis considered to be inferior. So here's a timeline of Hitler's anti-Semitic campaign. You have Hitler becoming chancellor in 1933, and then the Nazis instituting a one-day boycott of Jewish-owned businesses. Laws are set in place forbidding non-Aryans from holding jobs, such as teachers and government workers. In September of 1935, you have the Nuremberg laws, which strip Jews of their citizenship. So many had been in Germany for generations and generations. Jews who were not even practicing Jews religiously speaking are stripped of their citizenship. In 1938, the government seizes all Jewish-held passports and issues new ones that are marked with a J. And in November of 1938, Jewish communities are attacked in an event called Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. And in September 1941, a law is passed that requires all Jews to wear identifying yellow stars. These are some symbols showing how prisoners in Nazi concentration camps would have been identified by a triangular color-coded patch. I'm trying to think. Political prisoners. That usually meant communists. Communists and Jews were the first groups targeted by the Nazis. In this photograph, Nazi troops removed Jewish residents from the Warsaw Ghetto after a failed uprising in 1943. This has become one of the most famous images associated with the Holocaust. It's just heartbreaking. Many people also refer to the Holocaust as the Shoah, which just means catastrophe. And that is a very accurate way to describe it. That image down there in the bottom right shows the aftermath of Kristallnacht. I want to make it clear that Germans did not wake up to Hitler as chancellor and decide that, they disliked Jews, that they were suddenly anti-Semitic. And I also want to make it clear that Germans being anti-Semitic was not a unique phenomenon in Europe. Many Europeans were anti-Semitic, even many Americans. Of course, the level of anti-Semitism on the part of the Nazis is really unmatched. But the idea of being anti-Semitic is not new. It is something that had been around for centuries in Europe, particularly in Eastern Europe. All kinds of lies being told about the Jews. And so after World War I, the Jews were an easy scapegoat for the Nazis to point to and say, they sabotaged us, they're the reason why we lost, we have to get them out of our country. The Nazis had deported many Jews to this Polish border region. Poland wouldn't take them in, Germany didn't want them, and they were sort of stuck in this wilderness area. The child of two of these Jews was a boy, a young man, a teenager, named Herschel Greenspan. And Herschel Greenspan was living in France. And he, upset, horrified, terrified, asking for help, he ends up assassinating a German politician in Paris. And that is the pretext that is used for the beginning of Kristallnacht. So 1935, two really big events happen, right, in terms of the buildup to World War II. In 1935, you have the Nuremberg laws, which regulate, remove Jewish citizenship. If you were a Jewish person who had been married to a non-Jewish person, your marriage was void. It was invalidated. They were removed from public positions, had their property confiscated, had to change their names, had to add the J to their passport, and then you have Kristallnacht. And it's really Kristallnacht is the point at which people in Germany realized what was happening to the Jews.
Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, was the wave of violent anti-Jewish pogroms on November 9th and 10th of 1938. It took place throughout Germany, annexed Austria, and in areas of Czechoslovakia recently occupied by German troops. Kristallnacht owes its name to the shards of shattered glass from the windows of synagogues, homes, and Jewish-owned businesses that lined German streets in the wake of the pogrom. On November 7, 1938, Ernst von Rath, a German embassy official stationed in Paris, was assassinated by Herschel Grimsbund, a 17-year-old Polish Jew living illegally in Paris. Grimsbund revengefully shot the diplomat after witnessing the expulsion of not only his parents, but thousands of Jews of Polish citizenship living in the German Reich. Von Rath died on November 9, 1938. The same day, at a meeting of Nazi Party leadership, Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels, the chief instigator of the Kristallnacht pogroms, suggested that world Jewry had conspired to commit the assassination and ordered that any demonstration, while not organized by the Nazi Party, shall not be hampered. Newspapers reported otherwise. After Goebbels' speech, violence erupted in various parts of the Reich. Paramilitary, or SA, and Hitler Youth units throughout Germany and its annexed territories destroyed Jewish-owned homes and businesses. Jewish artifacts were confiscated, and many young, healthy Jewish men were arrested and filled local jails. The rioters destroyed 267 synagogues throughout Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland. Many synagogues burned throughout the night in full view of public and of local firefighters who had received orders to intervene only to prevent flames from spreading to nearby buildings. SA and Hitler Youth members shattered shop windows of an estimated 7,500 Jewish-owned commercial establishments and looted their wares. Jewish cemeteries became a particular object of desecration in many regions. Mobs of SA men roamed the streets, attacking Jews in their houses and forcing Jews they encountered to perform acts of public humiliation. Kristallnacht claimed the lives of at least 91 Jews. As the pogrom spread, units of the SS and Gestapo, the secret state police, arrested up to 30,000 Jewish males and transferred most of them from local prisons to Dachau and Buchenwald, as well as other concentration camps. In the immediate aftermath of the pogrom, measures were introduced to eliminate Jews and perceived Jewish influence from the German economic sphere. The German government announced that the Jews were to blame for the pogrom, imposing a fine of $400 million on the German Jewish community. German education officials expelled Jewish children still attending German schools. The German government announced laws that enforced Aryanization policy, the transfer of Jewish-owned enterprises and property to the Aryan ownership. The events of Kristallnacht represented one of the most important turning points in Nazi anti-Semitic policy. The Nazi regime moved eventually towards policies of forced immigration and finally toward the realization of a Germany free of Jews by deportation of the Jewish population to the east. It is important to understand and remember these events. It is also important to honor those that lived and died during this destructive part of history. It's probably most critical that we teach the lessons so that it may never happen again.
Okay. Many Jews do attempt to flee, but have nowhere to go. The Nazis in the beginning of the Holocaust, or in the beginning of World War II, the build up to World War II, do allow Jews to leave. So prior to like 1939, I should say. But it costs a lot of money. What about their property? And the U.S. didn't want to necessarily become responsible for those without means. Remember, this is still in the context of the Great Depression. Just a reminders that anti-Semitism is a common sentiment around the world. Leaders of the world meet at this Evian conference in France to discuss whether or not they will accept Jewish refugees, and most decline. There's a really famous episode in American history where the St. Louis, which is the name of a ship carrying Jewish refugees, arrives in the United States. And the United States denies that ship entry, denies those refugees safe harbor. They have to turn around and go back to Germany, where most of them end up being killed in the Holocaust.
The history of the Holocaust raises challenging questions about our responsibility as a nation to offer refuge and rescue to persecuted people from beyond our borders. In the spring of 1939, before the outbreak of World War II, the MS St. Louis set sail from Germany. Most of its 937 passengers were Jews fleeing from Nazi persecution. 5 years later, with the world now engulfed in war, and well after the United States had learned about the Holocaust, over 400,000 Jews were deported from Hungary to German killing centers. In both instances, public opinion and government policy determined how the United States responded. What can we learn from American action and inaction in the face of these events that could help us prevent future genocides? On November 9, 1938, the Nazi Party engaged in a campaign of violence against Jews throughout Germany and Austria, an event that became known as Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass.
Kristallnacht started for us early in the morning. My uncle wanted to close the shutters, leaving the outside world outside. And my grandmother said to him, "Stop that. It's too late. That's not going to protect us."
After 5 years of Nazi rule, hundreds of thousands of Jews were desperate to escape. The problem was, few countries were willing to take in more refugees. Many looked to the United States, but did not yet have immigrant visas. Some hoped that Cuba might offer temporary refuge until their U.S. visas came through. This set the stage for the voyage of the St. Louis.
On May 13, 1939, the St. Louis left Hamburg to go to Cuba, and on board were 937 passengers. The vast majority of these were Jews. This was the beginning of something new, something good. But when they arrived in Havana Harbor, those dreams were kind of shattered.
The Cuban government reversed its policy, invalidating most of the passengers' landing certificates. Only those with valid immigration visas could disembark in Havana.
The American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee sent a delegate to Cuba, but the negotiations fell apart, and the St. Louis had to leave Cuban waters. The captain decided that they were going to sail to the United States. They were America bound anyway, So it was believed that there would be some flexibility. They sent telegrams to government officials, to President Roosevelt, and to the State Department asking for entry. The State Department stated that though they had waiting numbers to get into the United States, they would have to wait their turn and leave American waters.
By 1938, 1939, public opinion is clearly against Nazi Germany. But that doesn't translate into a willingness to bring in refugees.
Even confronted with specific lives right off the coast of Miami Beach, American public opinion was so against increasing the immigration quota.
Immigrants coming to the United States that might represent a competition for jobs. Bad economic times fueled xenophobia and also fueled anti-Semitism.
So the St. Louis left American shores on June 7, 1939. Fortunately, with the intervention, again, of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, a deal was brokered with 4 Western European countries to take in the passengers: Belgium, Holland, France, and England.
This was kind of celebrated that these refugees had finally found homes. It's what nobody knew at that time, is that Europe would be engulfed in war just a few months afterwards.
In December 1941, the United States was officially at war with the Axis powers, Nazi Germany, Italy, and Japan. For Europe's Jews, the situation had greatly worsened, and they were increasingly trapped. By the middle of 1942, information about the Nazi policy to murder Jews began to reach the United States public. We now know that almost 2 million Jews had been killed by that time.
The persecution of the Jews in Europe had reached a really unimaginable scale, and that millions of people were now threatened with death. There was a new wave of interest in doing something, a sense that there had to be some kind of effort on behalf of the refugees.
This creates a mood among Jewish organizations to call public attention to what's happening and to urge action to save what remains of Europe's Jewish population.
So by the end of 1943, there is enough public awareness of the murder of the Jews that the Senate and the House of Representatives issued what is called the Rescue Resolution, calling for a U.S. government agency designed for the relief and rescue of Jews and other persecuted minorities. Simultaneously in the executive branch, a battle was going on between the State Department and the Treasury Department. The Treasury Department, who needed to approve licenses for relief and rescue, realized that the State Department was delaying assisting some of these Jewish aid organizations to send money into Europe.
Treasury Department officials compile a report that is placed before President Roosevelt in January of 1944. And almost immediately, Roosevelt decides on the creation of the War Refugee Board.
The War Refugee Board staff came from the Treasury Department. It was a group who worked with sending money overseas. John Paley, as director of the Foreign Funds Control, became the executive director largely because of the good work that his group was doing.
These were people who were really committed, morally committed, as well as politically committed to saving lives.
The board organizes some relief, but for the most part, they're working through other agencies, streamlining the process. They are able to facilitate sending millions of dollars into Europe and have a much greater impact.
Still, the War Refugee Board confronted a daunting task. The people it hoped to save remained far behind enemy lines, and the board could not divert vital military resources from the Allies' goal of winning the war as soon as possible. Options were very limited.
In the spring of 1944, the War Refugee Board was faced with one of its greatest crises, which was what to do about Hungary.
The Hungarian government had engaged in secret negotiations to leave the Axis. When the Germans found out about this, they sent troops into the country. And along with the troops came Adolf Eichmann's team of deportation specialists.
At the time of the German invasion in March 1944, Hungary was home to the largest Jewish community left in Europe, about 800,000 Jews. Within 2 months, at the request of the Germans, Hungarian authorities began deporting Jews by train to Auschwitz-Birkenau.
President Roosevelt held a news conference in which he warned the Hungarian government not to cooperate with Germany in its persecution. Government shortwave broadcasts to Eastern Europe threatened the Hungarian government that war criminals who cooperated with Germany in mass killings would be prosecuted after the war. This was not enough.
There was a long line of railroad cars, and then order came to mount the cars. And I remember even at 13, I had to help people like my grandmother, people like my aunt, to get up on the high car, and eventually the doors were closed, the locks were put on, and I don't know how many hours wait, and then the trains took off.
And we just couldn't believe that this is possible to transport people like this. It was, of course, standing places only. And there was a small window under the roof and a pail in the corner. It was unbelievable. People became hysterical. They were screaming. Some people were yelling. Some people were fainting. Some people were crying. It was a situation that I never, ever could imagine to happen to human beings.
On July 7th, 1944, the Hungarian ruler announced his order to halt the deportations to Auschwitz. A variety of outside pressures, including a U.S. bombing of Budapest on July 2nd, 1944, influenced his decision. By that time, over 400,000 people had been deported. Hungary's decision to halt the deportations offered the Jews remaining in Budapest a chance to survive, an opportunity the War Refugee Board seized.
There were approximately 120,000 Jews in Budapest in July of 1944. For the moment, they were spared, but no one knew how long they would be spared.
The War Refugee Board petitions and cables to all of the neutral nations of Europe, to Portugal, to Spain, to Switzerland, Sweden, Turkey, and asks them if they could increase their diplomatic representation in Hungary.
Working through diplomatic posts and other intermediaries like the International Red Cross, the War Refugee Board assisted a complex network of rescuers. They employed an array of tactics, from false passports and citizenship papers to safe houses and clandestine escapes. These measures enabled tens of thousands of Jews in Budapest to survive. Unfortunately, by July 1944, over 300,000 Hungarian Jews had already lost their lives.
The time for a War Refugee Board would have been before the war, when you really had refugees who were still looking for visas and able in some fashion to get out. If you wait until, in the case of the Holocaust, Hitler begins to expand his Reich across Europe, it's already too late.
I think one of the lessons is that the individual has power. It's public pressure that leads to the rescue resolutions in Congress in the fall of 1943. It's a number of people writing, it's people showing up to protests, it's people saying, I know what's going on in Europe, I believe it, and I want this government to try to stop it.
People want to know, have we learned from history? Have we learned specifically from the history of the Holocaust? And my answer is yes, but we learn very, very slowly.
Terrible things continue to happen. Governments continue to fail to respond sufficiently or soon enough to help victims of genocide around the world. And it's a tough call. There's no easy answer. There are challenges to intervening in a foreign country. There are certainly challenges when you implement a refugee policy that lets a lot of people in at once. And yet we really do need to think about this. When you have millions of people that are left homeless, who are murdered, whose lives are destroyed, those ruins have a ripple effect for every nation on this planet. It carries such a heavy cost that we have a responsibility to figure this one out.
Could the Holocaust have been prevented? Could Western democracies, especially Britain, France, and the United States, have intervened to stop the slaughter of millions of innocent people? There are no simple answers. But many people today believe that the West could have done more than it did. It's something to consider. Again, looking from our seat in 2020 backwards, it's easier to pass judgment on the actions of the people that came before us, for sure. Why didn't we do more? But it is a question that should be asked, especially in terms of how we move forward and treat other refugee crises as they arise, because they do continue to arise. The final solution refers to a specific policy of the Nazis adopted at the Wannsee Conference in 1942. They have identified Jews as a problem for many years, but it's not until the Wannsee Conference when they come up with what they call a final solution. This is the death camps, the extermination of the Jewish population. So in the beginning, it's get them out. If they die, they die. After Wannsee, it is a systematic campaign of deliberate murder. You've got maps here of deportation, and also the dots in the map on the right represent mobile killing units. So not all of the Jews that die in the Holocaust are killed in camps. Many of them are rounded up in their own communities and shot instead of being deported and killed in the camps. This is a sort of tally that's published from Wannsee Conference about how many Jews are in other European countries. You can see England, Finland, Ireland, Italy, Portugal, Sweden is listed on there, Spain, Turkey. So the idea is that they are going to expand from where they are now. And as they conquer other countries in Europe, they would kill the Jews that were in those nations as well. Images of concentration camps. Albright makes mocked frei. I can't speak today. That image in the bottom right, work makes free, is from Auschwitz. The first concentration camps are going to house political opponents, for example, communists. They are built as early as 1933. There are camps that are built even earlier. If you remember World War I, Gavrilo Princip, the guy from the Black Hand who kills Archduke Ferdinand, he actually is housed and dies in a concentration camp. Horrible conditions, disease, starvation, mistreatment, murder. This is a map of various concentration camps in Europe. Extermination camps are designed specifically for death. Auschwitz, Klemno, Treblinka are often called extermination camps. Healthy people are often worked to death. Old, young, and infirm would be immediately killed in these gas chambers. It decimates the Jewish population in Europe. Over 6.5 million Jews are killed, 5 to 6 million political prisoners, homosexuals, the disabled, Catholics, Jehovah's Witnesses, anybody who was a perceived threat. Since 1933, the Nazis had denied the Jews the rights of citizenship and committed acts of brutality against them. These acts of persecution were steps toward Hitler's final solution to the Jewish question. Nothing short of the systematic extermination of all Jews living in the regions controlled by the Third Reich. Today, we use the word genocide to describe such willful annihilation of a racial, political, or cultural group.